Thanksgiving morning, I decided to show up at my daughter's place without calling ahead. The first thing I saw stopped me cold. My grandson was standing on the porch in just a thin t shirt and shorts, his arms wrapped around himself, shaking in the 10-degree air. Inside, through the window, I caught sight of the whole clan gathered at the table, laughing over turkey and side dishes, cozy in the warmth while he froze outside. Anger boiled up in me so hard I did not think twice. I stormed up, smashed the door open with my boot. Police cruisers at the Hendersons again. Domestic problem. Reminded me of you and your troubles with the family. I stared at that line while my old Dodge pickup sat humming in the driveway. The Hendersons. Constance used to fret over their grandson all the time, back when she was still alive, back when worrying was part of her daily routine. Now it was just me, left behind, carrying that sharp ache in my gut every time my mind wandered to Marlene's marriage. The dashboard clock told me it was 2:45 in the afternoon. Time to get moving. I eased into reverse and rolled back out onto Whitmore Street. Snow had been falling for about an hour, heavy flakes that stuck to the road and made every mile dangerous. The radio crackled with warning reports as I guided the truck onto Interstate 64 heading south toward Charleston. I left it on the same classic rock station Constance and I used to love. Deep Purple was pounding out a tune, the weight of it sitting right with my mood. On the seat beside me sat two gift bags. One held a brand new baseball glove for Silas, real leather, pricier than I could honestly afford, but worth it for him. The other bag carried a stack of comic books, the same superhero stories he had been hooked on since he was 12 years old. He was 17 now, probably figured he had outgrown them. But I remembered being 17. Truth is, you are never too old to need a hero. Constance always used to remind me, family is all we really have. She would say it whenever she caught me grumbling about long holiday drives. She had been right back then, and she was still right, even if her words lived only in memory, now. Since losing her 6 months ago, every gathering felt fragile, like it could break at any second. The wipers scraped back and forth, fighting against the building snow. Other drivers crawled along with their hazard lights flashing like nervous fireflies. I kept both hands locked on the wheel, holding steady at 35 miles an hour. No sense rushing. Better to be late than land upside down in a ditch. Highway signs ticked off the distance to Charleston. I reached for my phone and tried Marlene's house. Thought maybe I could soften the surprise by letting them know I was on the way. It rang 5 times, then switched to voicemail. Odd. On Thanksgiving afternoon, there was usually someone near the phone. Through the curtain of snow, I spotted the glow of a gas station. Bright lights cut across the gray sky like a beacon. I pulled in, filled up the tank, and went inside for a hot coffee and a bag of the peppermints Silas liked. The clerk, a young guy with red eyes from lack of sleep, shook his head at the storm as he rang me up. "Roads are going bad fast," he muttered. "Where are you headed?" "Charleston." "Family dinner." He frowned. "Drive careful. I have already seen 3 wrecks today." Back in the truck, I checked the time again. 3:20. Normally it was a 45-minute run, but with the weather it would be closer to an hour. I pictured Silas at that moment, maybe lending his mother a hand in the kitchen or sitting with Garrett watching football. The kid had grown like a weed since the summer when we went fishing at Lake Champlain. He had caught his first bass that day, smiling so wide you would think he had just struck gold. That was when I had noticed the bruise on his arm. When I asked about it, he mumbled something about falling off his bike. But the mark was too clean, too shaped like a hand. I should have pressed him, should have asked more questions. Constance would have known how to handle it. The snowfall thickened as I steered toward Exit 12, heading into Marlene's neighborhood. Neat rows of 2-story homes lined the streets, most with pumpkins still on the porches and wreaths hanging from the doors. Some families had already strung Christmas lights, their colors flickering faintly through the white curtain. I turned into Pinehurst subdivision, creeping past houses where I imagined folks were gathered around tables, passing dishes and telling stories. Warm, golden light spilled through the windows, painting bright squares across snow-covered lawns. This day was supposed to bring us together, a day of mending. Constance would have wanted that. Marlene's street came into view, and her house stood at the end, a blue two-story with white shutters. Garrett's pickup sat in the drive alongside her car. Smoke curled from the chimney and holiday garlands wrapped around the porch rail. It all looked picture perfect, calm and peaceful. I slowed the truck, already picturing their faces when they saw me. Maybe Silas would come running, throw his arms around me like he used to when he was small. Maybe this Thanksgiving could mark the start of repairing the cracks in our family, just like Constance always hoped. I eased the truck into the driveway behind Garrett's, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Through the curtain of falling snow, I noticed the porch lit up with strings of holiday lights, faint music slipping through the walls. It looked like something straight out of an Andrew Wyeth painting. Warm, cheerful, welcoming. Then my eyes landed on him. Silas was sitting on the front steps, arms locked tight around his knees, head bowed. He wore no jacket, no hat, only a thin shirt with long sleeves and a pair of jeans already dusted white. His shoulders trembled, and I could tell it wasn't just the cold working on him. "Good Lord," I muttered, throwing open the truck door. The wind hit me like a whip, stinging my skin with shards of ice. By the time I reached him, I could see the blue around his lips, the way his hands pressed hard against his sides as if trying to hold on to the last bit of warmth. "Silas!" I called, nearly slipping on the frozen drive as I rushed forward. "What on earth are you doing out here?" He lifted his head, and the look in his eyes nearly broke me. His face was pale, cheeks raw from the cold, and relief flashed across his features when he saw me. "Grandpa?" His teeth were knocking so hard it came out barely more than a whisper. I can't." I didn't let him finish. I stripped off my heavy winter coat and draped it across his shoulders, pulling it tight around him. His body was icy to the touch, trembling like a leaf in a storm. "What do you mean you can't? Can't what?" I steadied him as I pulled him to his feet. His knees gave out almost instantly. "How long have you been sitting here?" "I am not allowed." His voice cracked as he pulled my coat closer. "I am not allowed to go inside." The words hit harder than any punch. Behind us, through the glowing windows, came bursts of laughter and the muffled sound of a television. They were celebrating inside, all warm and fed, while my grandson was left outside like trash in the snow. "Not allowed?" My voice snapped sharper than I meant. "This is your home." He flinched at my tone, and I forced myself to breathe, to soften. The boy didn't need more shouting. "Please," he whispered, eyes darting to the door. "Do not make it worse for me. If Garrett hears—" I looked from the warm lights and festive decorations back to the boy standing in front of me, shivering and colorless, dressed for spring in the middle of a frozen November. "How long, Silas?" I kept my voice low, steady. "How long have you been out here?" He would not meet my gaze. Since this morning." "This morning?" I glanced at my watch. 3:30. My stomach turned. "Son, it's below freezing. You could have lost your fingers, your toes." I cut myself off before piling more fear on top of him. I tried the front door. Locked. Of course it was. They had shut him out on Thanksgiving Day and left him to freeze while they feasted. "Come on," I said, steering him toward my truck. "We need to get you warm." Even as I helped him climb inside, my mind was turning over the pieces. The way he flinched when I raised my voice, the bruise I had seen on his arm that summer at Lake Champlain, the way he carried himself, careful, quiet, like a boy who had learned to make himself invisible. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a pattern. I set him in the passenger seat, cranked the heater all the way up, and pulled out a blanket from the emergency kit. His hands were too stiff to hold anything, so I took them in mine, rubbing life back into his fingers. "Talk to me, son," I said evenly, fighting to keep the anger out of my voice. "Tell me what happened this morning." He stared at his numb hands, voice barely audible. "I was helping Mom with the turkey. She asked me to keep an eye on it while she showered. I forgot to switch off the timer when I pulled it out to baste." I frowned. "That's it? You forgot a timer?" He nodded, ashamed. "The top got a little too dark, not ruined, just burnt in spots. Garrett saw it. He said I ruined Thanksgiving, that guests would think Mom couldn't cook, that I was a shame to the family." My jaw locked tight as he pulled the blanket closer around him. Then he said I had to think about my actions, that I couldn't come back in until I learned some responsibility. "And your mother?" My words came out harder than I intended. Silas shifted his eyes away. She tried to speak up at first, but Garrett told her to keep out of it, said it was between him and me. She didn't say anything after that. I checked my watch again, 3:45. Silas, what time did this start? About 11. 4.5 hours. They had left him sitting outside in deadly weather for 4.5 hours over a turkey that was a little darker on top. I had to take long breaths to keep from roaring. Has this happened before? The words hung there heavy. I watched him weigh his answer, fear battling with the need to be honest. Finally, he whispered, "Sometimes, when I mess up." Last month, he made me stay in the garage the whole night because forgot to take the trash cans to the curb. Another time, he locked me down in the basement for 2 straight days after I accidentally knocked over one of his beer bottles. Hearing Silas say this felt like taking blows to the stomach. I looked at that boy, bright, gentle, the kind of kid who would never hurt a soul, and I noticed again the way he carried himself, always cautious, as if he had learned that taking up too much space could be dangerous. "Does your mother know all of this?" I asked. "She says Garrett is just trying to teach me discipline," Silas said, his voice breaking. "That I need to be more responsible. Maybe she's right, maybe I really am just—" "Don't." I cut him off, turning in the seat so I could face him square. "Do not blame yourself. What that man is doing to you isn't discipline, it's abuse. And I am telling you right now, it stops today." Silas's eyes widened with panic. "No, Grandpa, please. If you stir things up, he'll only take it out on me. He always does." Through the windshield, the house still looked warm and cheerful. Decorations glowing, music drifting out, voices laughing inside. My daughter was serving Thanksgiving dinner, entertaining guests while her husband's stepson froze outside in the snow, too scared to ask for a shred of kindness. "Listen to me," I said, gripping his hands again. "You are 17 years old. You do not have to live this way anymore. I am not going to stand by and let it continue." "But where would I go?" His voice trembled. "I don't have money. I can't pay for college without—" "You are coming with me. Tonight." My voice hardened with the decision as it left my mouth. "We will figure out the rest later." I saw the war in his expression. Hope on one side, because maybe, just maybe, someone was finally standing up for him. Fear on the other, because he had been taught not to believe things could ever truly change. "He will not let me leave," Silas whispered. "He will call the police, say I stole something, or accuse you of kidnapping." I looked at the house again, the porch lights glowing through the storm. Something inside me went cold and sharp, like steel being forged. Constance had always been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed rough edges with patience. But Constance was gone now, and patience hadn't kept Silas out of the cold for 4.5 hours. "Let me handle Garrett," I said, pushing the door open. "Right now, we are going inside for your things." Snow crunched under my boots as I stepped out. Behind me, Silas scrambled after, still wrapped in my coat. The front door was locked, but I wasn't planning on knocking. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the kind of anger that builds over years and finally bursts like a freight train. "Why didn't you tell me it was this bad?" I asked, looking closer at his face. In the dim porch light, I noticed faint bruises along his jawline, half hidden under windburn and red skin. "I tried to hint," he whispered, clutching the coat tighter. "But you always talk to Mom, and she—" The memory hit me like a slap. A month back, Silas had called while I was fixing dinner. His voice had been so small. "Grandpa, Garrett says I cannot eat dinner with them anymore. Says I have to earn my place back at the table." I had laughed it off then, chalked it up to teenage dramatics. I even called Marlene the next day, and she brushed it aside like it was nothing. "Dad, you are overreacting," she told me. "It is just normal discipline. Silas blew everything out of proportion. You know how teenagers are." Another memory surfaced. Over the summer, Silas had phoned sounding tired and beaten down. "Mom?" Garrett yelled at me again for leaving dishes in the sink. He made me wash every plate, every cup, twice. When I'd asked Marlene about it, she sighed that weary sigh of hers. "He is just dramatic. Garrett is trying to teach him responsibility." "How long has this been going on?" I asked now, though a part of me already feared the answer. "Since Mom married him, 3 years. His voice was barely there. "It started small, redoing chores if I didn't do them perfect. Then it kept getting worse." I remembered that fishing trip over the summer. Silas hadn't wanted to go home, kept asking if we could stay another day. Back then, I thought he just liked being on the lake, but now it was clear. The way his face darkened whenever I mentioned school starting, the way he had grown silent when I said it was time to pack up. The basement, I said, connecting pieces. The nights in the garage. How often has this happened? More times than I want to count. He looked at his hands, and shame coated his words. Last winter, he locked me out for forgetting to shovel. On Christmas Eve, I slept in your truck while you were visiting. My heart nearly stopped. My truck. He had slept in my truck on Christmas Eve while I was inside, drinking eggnog and thinking how blessed we all were. The guilt crushed me like a weight. I looked again toward that house, the lights glowing warm, laughter still drifting from within. A picture-perfect holiday, while my grandson nearly froze to death on the steps outside. Your mother knows all of this? Silas gave a miserable nod. She says Garrett is just trying to make me a better man, that I am too sensitive, that I need to learn to follow rules. I felt it then, rage, hot and focused, tightening in my chest. My vision narrowed, sharpened. Constance had always told me to count to 10 when I felt my temper building, but counting to 10 would not erase bruises or frostbite or 3 years of suffering. I did not have Constance to remind me that counting to 10 sometimes helps. Counting would not warm my grandson. I stood up with Silas still draped in my coat and said, "Come on, we are going inside." "Grandpa, no, please," he whispered, panic in his voice. "If you make a scene, he will just make you sleep outside in the cold? Beat you? Starve you?" I finished for him, my voice getting harder with every word. "Son, it cannot get much worse than this," I said, but he looked at the front door like it was the mouth of a storm. "You do not understand how he is when someone crosses him." I was already moving toward the house, Silas following like a reluctant shadow. The door looked solid, expensive, Garrett's sort of bragging rights kind of door, the kind that matches a perfect suburban facade. I did not bother with a knock. I brought my boot down beside the lock as hard as I could. 72 years had not taken all the strength out of me. Decades on the factory floor left you with something a police officer or a young man in the gym rarely had. The wood gave with a loud crack that seemed to pour into the neighborhood, and the door flew open, slamming against the wall. Warm air hit us, full of turkey and gravy, and a sudden silence that felt like a slap. I stepped into the foyer with Silas close behind, and the sight in the dining room stopped me cold. The table was set like a magazine spread, white cloth, candles flickering, crystal catching the light. Garrett sat at the head of the table in a neatly pressed shirt, knife in hand. Marlene looked like she had stepped out of a catalog in a green dress I did not recognize. A little girl, maybe 10, had a forkful of mashed potatoes frozen halfway to her mouth. Everyone was paused like somebody had pressed pause on a perfect family portrait. The contrast hit me like a punch. They were warm and comfortable inside, enjoying their meal, while my grandson had been left shivering on the front steps for over 3.5 hours. The turkey on the table looked golden, probably the replacement for whatever was ruined. Everything pristine, everything peaceful, everything except the fact they had left a kid to freeze. "Have you completely lost your minds?" I bellowed, and the little girl dropped her fork with a clatter. Marlene's face went white. The serving spoon hit the table and gravy spattered across the cloth. "How did you get in here? What are you doing?" Marlene squeaked. I pointed at Silas, still wrapped in my coat, his lips purple at the edges. "While you people sit here feasting like royalty, that boy was outside freezing. 3.5 hours, Marlene. 3.5 hours. 3.5 hours in weather that could have killed him." Garrett set the carving knife down slowly and stood. He was a big man, bigger than I remembered, probably heavier than I was. I had been in fights when I was younger, but weight is only part of it. Anger has muscles of its own. "Who gave you permission to enter my house?" His voice was controlled and dangerous, the kind of voice a man uses when he thinks he can bully you into submission. "This is private property. You are trespassing." He was sizing me up, measuring whether he could scare me off. "You mean the private property where you locked my grandson out to freeze while you ate?" I stepped forward. A younger child started to cry, confused by the shouting. Marlene reached for her but would not take her eyes off me. I could see the battle in her face. Protect her father or protect her son. This is a private family matter, Garrett said, his tone rising. You have no business. No business? I felt heat flood my face. That is my grandson you left out to nearly die. Silas pressed against my side, smaller than the room, shaking from cold and fear. For the first time, I could remember someone else was standing up to Garrett in his own house, and you could feel the room tense, waiting for the blow. Somewhere, that soft holiday music kept playing about gratitude and family togetherness. The irony would have been funny if I had not been so angry. Look at him, I told Garrett, pointing straight at Silas. Really look at what you did. Garrett crossed his arms and lifted his chin like a man who had already decided he was righteous. The boy ruined our holiday, he said. He needed to learn responsibility and consequences. A lesson? I almost laughed, but it felt like bile in my throat. You nearly froze a child to death over a turkey that was a little darker on top. He is 17. Not a child, Garrett snapped. This is my house and my rules. I am trying to teach him discipline, something his mother apparently failed to do in his first 16 years. Marlene flinched at that and said nothing, sitting there in her green dress like she was watching a match instead of defending her son. Discipline? I stepped so close I could see the grease on Garrett's plate and the wine stain at the corner of his mouth. That is called abuse. You are lucky I do not call the police right now. Garrett laughed, a cold little sound. He forgot to turn off a timer and burned a $30 turkey. I sent him outside to think about his actions. That's not abuse, that's parenting. For 3.5 hours, in 10-degree weather? I shot back. He's being dramatic, like always, Garrett muttered, waving his hand like brushing off a fly. Look at him. He's fine. A little cold never hurt anyone. I glanced at Silas, still wrapped in my coat, lips blue, body trembling. Fine? This man thought hypothermia was fine. Dad, please, Marlene finally spoke, voice shaky. Don't ruin our holiday. We can talk later, as a family. Ruin your holiday? I turned to her. Your son froze outside while you feasted, and you're worried about me ruining things? She stared at her plate. Garrett was just trying to teach responsibility. Boys need firm guidance. Firm guidance? My voice cracked. Marlene, when you dented my truck at 17, did I lock you out in a blizzard? When you failed math, did I make you sleep in the garage? That's different, she whispered. How? I pressed. Garrett stepped forward, face red. Because this is my house, and Silas isn't my blood. I can discipline him how I choose. There it was. Silas wasn't his son, so he wasn't worth protecting. Just a burden to control. You've got 30 seconds, I said, voice low. Apologize to him. Show an ounce of decency. Garrett laughed, colder than before. I don't owe him anything. If he doesn't like my rules, he can leave. The little girl sobbed. Marlene tried to hush her, but all I saw was Garrett's smug grin, and Silas believing he deserved 3.5 hours in the cold. Somewhere else to live? I stepped closer, smelling wine on his breath. You're right, he is leaving. I pulled out my phone, slow and deliberate. Garrett's smugness cracked. Either apologize right now, I said, voice steady, or I call Child Protective Services. Report every bit of it. You wouldn't dare. He loomed closer, but I'd faced bigger men. Try me, I said, punching in the first number. I'll tell them you left a 17-year-old outside for hours in freezing weather. Silas gripped my arm, shaking, not from cold, but from fear of what defiance brought. Dad, please, Marlene stepped between us, hands raised. Don't destroy our family over this. I'm not destroying anything, I said, eyes locked on Garrett. He did, the moment he abused my grandson. Abuse? Garrett barked a bitter laugh. I was teaching him responsibility, something his weak mother never managed. Marlene flinched but stayed silent. Get out of my house, old man, Garrett roared. Silas is mine to deal with. Yours? I looked around the perfect dining room, then at Silas's bruised face. You call this responsibility? Locking a boy out to freeze? He's not a boy, he's 17, Garrett snapped. In my house, adults who break rules face adult consequences. Forgetting timers, being careless, embarrassing us. He ruined our holiday. Our guests even left because of him. I glanced at the empty chairs. Guests had eaten here while Silas sat outside in the snow, and none had spoken up. Not one. Grandpa, let's just go, Silas whispered. Please, I don't want more problems. That defeated voice broke something inside me. This boy thought he was the problem for wanting basic decency. "You're not the problem, son," I said, loud enough for them all to hear. "You never were." I turned back to Garrett, the decision cold and final. "You have 30 seconds to apologize to my grandson." "I am not apologizing for anything," Garrett said, arms crossed, chin high, "and I am not taking orders from some bitter old man who cannot admit his precious boy needed discipline." "Then we are done." I slipped the phone back into my pocket. "Silas, get your things. You are coming home with me." The silence that followed was heavy. Even the little girl stopped crying. "You cannot just take him," Marlene whispered. "Watch me." I put a hand on Silas's shoulder and steered him toward the stairs. "Go pack." "Dad, you cannot do this," Marlene said, panicked. "You cannot walk into our house and take my son." "I can, and I am. Unless you want me to call the authorities and let them handle it." Silas hurried up the narrow staircase, his steps quick, Garrett's heavy tread following close behind. "This is kidnapping," Garrett shouted. "I will have you arrested. Good luck explaining why my grandson spent 3.5 hours outside in 10-degree weather," I shot back. At the end of the hall was a small room barely big enough for a twin bed and dresser. No heat vent, window facing north, more storage than bedroom. "This is where you sleep?" I asked. Silas nodded, stuffing clothes into a duffel. "Garrett says the basement's for guests, and the other room's for my sister. Not our sister, always an outsider." "Take what matters," I said, standing guard. "We are not coming back." Marlene appeared, face streaked with tears. "Silas, this is your home, your family." "Some family," he muttered, folding a Marshall University sweatshirt. "Real families don't lock you outside to freeze, or call it teaching responsibility." He looked at her then, eyes full of hurt. "Mom, last week he made me sleep in the garage for leaving a glass in the sink." Her face crumpled. "He just has high standards." "No," Silas said, zipping his bag. "He wants me gone, and you know it." We went downstairs. Garrett blocked the bottom like a guard. "You walk out, boy, and do not come back." "Fine by me," Silas said, his voice finally steady. The front door still hung open from my kick, cold air whipping the decorations. "Silas," Marlene cried as we reached the door. "Please, I love you." He stopped. "If you loved me, Mom, you would not have let this happen." We walked to my truck in silence. I tossed his bag in the bed and got him into the passenger seat. Through the window, I saw Marlene crying, Garrett raging, the little girl peeking from behind. "You ready?" I asked. "I have been ready for 3 years," Silas said, pulling my coat close. I backed out, past warm houses where families finished their meals in peace. The radio still played classic rock, the heater roared, and for the first time Silas looked like he could breathe. "Thank you, Grandpa," he said softly. "I cannot believe you came." "I should have come sooner," I admitted. "I tried to tell you, I just didn't know how." We drove in silence, the responsibility heavy on my shoulders, the way Constance's quilt used to be. This boy needed protection, needed a chance to grow. "Tell me about college," I asked as we merged onto Interstate 64. "Mechanical engineering," he said, stronger now. "Like you worked in the factory." I smiled, thinking of Constance and how proud she would be. "We will handle tuition. Do not worry." "Grandpa, I do not want to be a burden." "You are not a burden," I said firmly. "You are family, and family takes care of each other." My driveway felt smaller than usual with both trucks squeezed in, but the house glowed like a beacon. I had left the porch light on out of habit, and now I was grateful for it, cutting through the winter dark. "Home sweet home," I said, helping Silas carry his bag to the door. The key turned easily, and warm air rolled out, smelling of coffee and Constance's lavender sachets. It was only a modest ranch with worn furniture and tired carpet, but it was paid for, and it was ours. "You remember where the guest room is?" I asked, switching on lights. "Yeah, down the hall next to your room," Silas said, looking around with relief. "It's so warm in here." "Thermostat stays at 74, I told him. "Your grandmother always said life's too short to be cold in your own house." I showed him the guest room, simple but comfortable. A double bed with one of Constance's quilts, a dresser, a reading chair. Family photos lined the walls, including several of Silas. Seeing him there again felt right for the first time since Constance died. "I'll get some dinner going," I said. "Nothing fancy, chicken and vegetables." "Can I help?" he asked, eager to be useful. "You can, but you don't have to. This is your home now, not a job." We worked side by side in the kitchen, the day's tension slowly leaving his shoulders. I thawed chicken while he washed vegetables, moving around each other with the easy rhythm of family. Tell me what's been happening, I said as I seasoned the meat. Start from when your mother married Garrett. Silas hesitated, then said, It started small, comments about how I loaded the dishwasher where I left my shoes. Then it got bigger. How much bigger? He controls everything. When I eat, shower, use the phone. His voice shrank. He made Mom choose between him and me. She chose him. I gripped the counter. What do you mean? Last Christmas when you visited, remember how I was quiet? Garrett told me I couldn't speak unless spoken to. Mom didn't stop him. The memory hit me like a punch. I had joked to Constance later that Silas was just being moody. Why won't your mother stand up to him? She's scared, he said, chopping carrots. If she leaves, she loses the house. She can't afford us alone. I slid the chicken into the oven and built a fire in the living room to calm my thoughts. Come sit, I said when it was crackling. Tell me the good things. School, friends. We settled into the chairs by the fire. For the first time all day, Silas smiled. I made Dean's list. My friend Caleb's teaching me guitar. Your grandmother always wanted to learn guitar, I said, pointing to a framed photo of her at 20 with an acoustic. She called music the language of the soul. I remember her saying that, Silas murmured, studying the photo. I miss her, he added. Me too, son. We talked until the chicken was done, sharing memories and planning his spring semester. The house felt alive again with conversation and laughter. Over dinner, I looked at my grandson and saw hope instead of fear. We'll call the college tomorrow, I said. Make sure your aid is set and maybe get you a part-time job if you want one. Grandpa, you don't have to. Yes, I do, I said. That's what family's for. The phone rang just as we finished dessert, leftover pie from the freezer. Silas tensed instantly. I saw the caller ID and felt my jaw tighten. Marlene, the peaceful crackle of the fire was broken by 3 sharp knocks on the door. Not the gentle tap of a neighbor, but the pounding of someone demanding entry. Silas nearly dropped his mug. Grandpa? Stay behind me, I said, setting my cup down and moving toward the door. The knocking grew louder, mixed with multiple voices on the porch. I flicked on the porch light and checked the peephole. 2 uniformed officers stood on my doorstep, and right behind them, like wolves waiting for their turn, were Garrett and Marlene. Mr. Callahan, the lead officer called out. Police, we need to speak with you. I drew a deep breath and opened the door, standing square to block their view of Silas. Evening, officers. What can I do for you? Garrett jumped forward, finger pointed like a weapon. This man kidnapped my stepson. He broke into my house and dragged the boy away. The older officer, a man with lined eyes that had seen too many nights like this, held up his hand. Sir, let us get the story straight. Mr. Callahan, is there a young man named Silas Palmer here? Yes, I said evenly. My grandson is here. He kidnapped him. Garrett's voice was loud enough to wake the street. Broke down our door like a criminal and forced Silas out of the house. Is the young man here voluntarily? The second officer asked, pulling a notepad from his pocket. Before I could answer, Silas came to stand beside me, still wrapped in the blanket from my couch. His voice shook, but his words were steady. I want to stay with my grandpa. Garrett's face went crimson. See? He's been filling the boy's head with lies, turning him against his family. What lies? I shot back. The truth that you left him outside in 10-degree weather for 3.5 hours? The truth that you've been abusing him for 3 years? Abuse? Garrett barked a laugh, brittle and hollow. I was teaching responsibility. He ruined Thanksgiving dinner and needed to learn consequences. The lead officer's expression was the weary mask of a man who'd broken up more family wars than he cared to count. Mr. Callahan, we're going to need everyone inside so we can go over this properly. I stepped back, letting the officers enter. Garrett barreled in right after, Marlene trailing behind him, eyes fixed on the floor. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight of her choices had finally crushed her. All right, the officer said, notebook open. Sir, you're saying this man kidnapped your stepson? Absolutely, Garrett said with his practiced air of authority. I came home to a broken door and found Silas gone. Neighbors told me an older man forced him into a truck. Forcing him? I nearly laughed. Officer, I rescued my grandson from abuse. He's always hated my marriage to Marlene, Garrett cut in, shaking his head with a sad performance. He's been looking for an excuse to cause trouble. The officer turned to Silas, who stood so close to me I could feel him trembling. Son, did this man force you to leave with him? No, sir. Silas's voice was quiet but certain. He saved me. Saved you from what? The officer asked. Silas glanced at Garrett, then back at the officer. From freezing to death on the porch. The second officer stopped writing. Explain that. I burned the turkey this morning, Silas said. Garrett made me sit outside to think about it. I was out there more than 3.5 hours. It was 10 degrees. He's exaggerating, Garrett snapped. It was maybe an hour and he had warm clothes. An hour? I stepped forward, anger tight in my throat. Officer, when I arrived at 3:30, he was in a thin shirt and jeans. He'd been there since 11. The first officer's eyes narrowed as he turned back to Garrett. Sir, did you make the boy sit outside as punishment? Briefly, Garrett said, his confidence faltering, but he's blowing it out of proportion. In freezing weather? For several hours. Garrett shifted, grasping for ground. Teenagers need discipline. His mother and I agreed. Mom didn't agree. Silas cut in, stronger now. She just didn't stop you. Every gaze turned toward Marlene. She hovered by the door, hands knotted together, looking like she wanted to disappear. Ma'am, the officer prompted, we need your account. Marlene looked at Garrett, then at Silas. She shook as if standing on a cliff's edge, one word away from falling. Mrs. Palmer, the officer said gently, please tell us what happened today. Garrett leaned closer to her, shoulders squared, eyes issuing their silent threat. Tell them, honey, he murmured. Tell them how your father poisoned Silas against us. Sir, the officer said firmly, step back. Let her speak for herself. Marlene's voice barely rose above a whisper. Silas did burn the turkey, and Garrett was upset. She swallowed hard. He said Silas needed to learn responsibility by sitting outside, in the cold. Her eyes flicked toward her husband, then away. Since around 11. Until when? The officer asked. Until my father arrived, Marlene whispered, her voice shrinking. Around 3:30. The officer did the math quickly. Over 3.5 hours, in 10-degree weather. She's exaggerating, Garrett snapped. He could have come inside any time if he'd apologized and shown some remorse. No, he couldn't, Marlene said suddenly, and the room froze. You locked the door. You told me not to let him in, no matter what. The silence after her words was heavy enough to choke on. Garrett's face turned white, then flushed red, then white again. Marlene, he hissed, his voice razor-sharp. What are you doing? I'm telling the truth. She turned her tearful eyes toward Silas. For once in 3 years, I'm telling the truth. The officer leaned forward. Mrs. Palmer, has this kind of punishment happened before? Yes, the word burst out of her like it had been trapped for years. He's made Silas sleep in the garage, in the basement. He's locked him out overnight. Her voice grew steadier with each admission. He controls when Silas can eat, when he can shower, even when he can speak at the table. Marlene, shut up. Garrett's mask cracked wide open. You don't know what you're doing. You'll destroy everything we've built. What we've built? She turned on him, her voice suddenly sharp with fury. All we've built is fear and misery. Look at my son. Look at what you've done to him. I saw Silas's face change right there. 3 years of guilt and self-blame began to lift as he realized someone else finally saw the truth. The first officer stepped forward. Sir, turn around and put your hands behind your back. This is ridiculous. Garrett backed toward the door. You're going to arrest me based on the word of a bitter old man and his unstable daughter? Based on physical evidence and multiple corroborating testimonies of child endangerment, the officer replied calmly, pulling out handcuffs, you have the right to remain silent. As they cuffed him and started reading his rights, Garrett turned his venom on Marlene. You'll regret this. You'll lose the house, the money, everything. You'll be nothing without me. I'd rather be nothing than watch you hurt my son, she said, and for the first time in years, she sounded like the strong woman who had raised Silas alone. The door shut behind the officers, leaving the three of us in silence. Marlene collapsed into a chair, sobbing, not the quiet, restrained tears from before, but deep, raw sobs that came from years of burying pain. Silas dropped to his knees beside her. Mom, it's okay. It's over now. I'm so sorry, she cried. I should have protected you. I should have been stronger. You were strong tonight, I said, lowering myself into my chair by the fire. When it mattered most, you chose your son. That took courage. The fire snapped and crackled in the hearth, and for the first time in months, my house felt like a real home again, not just because Silas was safe, but because the truth had finally been spoken. Silas looked up at me, his hand still holding his mother's. "What happens now, Grandpa?" "Now," I said simply, "we heal. We take our time and we heal." 5 months later, sunlight poured through the kitchen window as Marlene flipped pancakes on the griddle and Silas sat at the table reading his acceptance letter from West Virginia State's engineering program. "Full scholarship," he said for the 10th time that week, still shaking his head in disbelief. "They're actually paying me to go to school." "That's what happens when you're brilliant and work hard," Marlene said, setting a stack of pancakes in front of him. She looked different now, stronger, more sure of herself. The part-time job at the library had given her independence, and the divorce settlement had given her enough to start fresh. "Your grandmother would have been so proud," I said, sipping my coffee. The kitchen felt alive again with laughter and conversation, the kind of warm chaos I hadn't heard since Constance passed. Marlene had moved in permanently after Garrett's conviction. The guest room was hers now, and the basement had been turned into a proper bedroom for Silas, not a punishment cell like at Garrett's house, but a space of his own, warm and comfortable. "Dad, are you sure you don't mind us staying here long term?" Marlene asked as she joined us at the table. "I know you're used to your independence." "Independence is overrated," I said honestly. "Family's what matters. Besides, who else will keep Silas from burning down the kitchen when he tries to cook?" "That was one time," Silas said, laughing, "and the fire was small." The phone rang, and Marlene answered. "Callahan Residence. Oh, hi, Caleb. Yes, he's here. Guitar practice at 4? Sure, I'll tell him." She hung up and turned to Silas. "Caleb wants to know if you're still practicing for the talent show." "The talent show?" I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't tell me about any talent show." Silas grinned, looking more like the young man he was meant to be. "It's nothing big. Caleb and I are doing an acoustic set. A couple of classic rock songs you'd know. I'll be in the front row," I promised. After breakfast, I found Marlene in the living room, setting new family photos on the mantel beside the old ones of Constance. There was one from Silas's high school graduation we'd missed because of the Garrett mess, one from our fishing trip last month, and one from Christmas morning, our first real family Christmas in years. "Any word from Garrett?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. "His lawyer called yesterday," she said. "The anger management therapy's going well, apparently, but he lost his job at the supermarket. He's moving back to Wheeling to live with his sister." "Good. The farther away, the better. Sometimes I almost feel sorry for him," she admitted. "But then I remember what he did to Silas, and the feeling disappears quick." That afternoon, while Silas was off at guitar practice, Marlene and I worked in the garden, turning soil in Constance's old vegetable patch. Spring was coming early, and planting seeds felt like setting hope into the ground. "Dad," Marlene said, yanking weeds with determination, "I need to thank you again for what you did. If you hadn't come that day—" "You don't need to thank me," I cut in, breaking up a stubborn clump of earth. "I did what any grandfather would." "No, you didn't. You risked everything for him. You could have been arrested, charged with kidnapping." "But I wasn't," I said. "Truth has a way of winning out." She smiled, brushing dirt from her hands. "Constance used to say that." "She was smart," I nodded. "Smarter than me, anyway." That evening we fell into a new routine, dinner together, then a game show or some old movie on television. It wasn't flashy, but it was what we needed. Predictable, peaceful, safe. Silas strummed his guitar in the corner, Marlene filled in crossword squares, and I read the paper. Ordinary family life, the kind we'd thought was gone forever. During a commercial break, Silas spoke up. "Grandpa, I've been thinking about changing my major." "From engineering to what?" "Social work, maybe counseling." He set his guitar down and looked at me seriously. "I want to help other kids who are going through what I went through." The pride that swelled in me nearly stole my breath. After all he'd suffered, this boy still wanted to give. "That's a fine goal," I said. "Your grandmother always said the best way to heal your own pain is to help others avoid it." Did she really say that? She did, along with 1,000 other things I should have listened to more carefully. Later, after Marlene dozed off in her chair, Silas and I stepped out onto the back porch. The sky was sharp and clear, full of stars, nothing like that frozen Thanksgiving night when I'd found him shivering on Garrett's steps. Ready for fishing season? I asked. Can't wait. Think we'll catch anything bigger than last year? With your luck, probably a whale, he said, grinning. We stood together in quiet, two generations of Callahans who'd come through crisis and found our way back to each other. Soon Silas would head to college, and one day he'd build his own life. But the foundation was strong now, made of honesty, protection, and love that didn't ask for anything back. Grandpa? He said as we walked inside. Yeah? Thank you for coming for me. Thank you for thinking I was worth saving. The house was warm and bright as we locked up for the night. Three people who had learned the same lesson. Family isn't just blood. It's showing up when it matters, speaking the truth even when it hurts, and protecting the people you love no matter what it costs. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. And as always, thank you for watching.